Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Before we begin, we have an important announcement. Today at 7 p.m. on the BYJU'S Exam Prep app, we have a special workshop organized especially for beginners. If you guys are preparing from home, if you want to know how to ace the exam in the very first attempt, do attend this workshop which will be conducted by Sarmad Mehraj sir. The link for registering for this workshop will be provided in the description box below. So with this, let's begin with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at the topics that we are going to cover. I have chosen 3 important articles from the editorial and column section from page number 9 and 10. We have to carry out a thorough and detailed understanding of these topics as they are more relevant for your mains exam. There are several points related to your prelims as well, which I'm going to point out. Following which we'll discuss few smaller articles that are specifically related to your prelims. So these are the 8 articles we have lined up for today. And before we begin, why don't you support us by pressing the like button, by sharing these videos with other aspirants, and also by subscribing to our channel. And also don't forget, as soon as the session ends, every day we have a live quiz on our Telegram channel on these topics that we have covered. So do subscribe to our Telegram channel as well so you can revise these topics again. So let's begin with the first article for today from page number 9, which deals with soft power diplomacy of India. In this column, the writer is talking about how India leverages its Buddhist heritage to project its soft power influence across Asia and how we compete with China in terms of leveraging our Buddhist heritage. So in this context, we need to understand everything about soft power diplomacy and the role of Buddhist diplomacy in Indian foreign policy. For beginners, of course, we have to start with the basics. First, we need to understand these terminologies. What is hard power and what is soft power? The term soft power was coined by a very popular thinker and political scientist, Joseph Nye, from the Harvard University. He coined this term during the Cold War period, when the world was divided between the 2 superpowers, where they were busy in engaging in a geopolitical rivalry against each other. During the Cold War period, in diplomacy, countries were always exercising their military power and economic power to force others, to threaten others. And diplomacy was largely about coercion, about forcing others to change their behavior. So in this context, Joseph Nye, he laid the foundation for neoliberal foreign policy, and he coined the term soft power, which believes in building friendships and long-lasting relationships based on trust and goodwill. There's a contrasting difference between the engagement of hard power and soft power in diplomacy. You see that in Indian diplomacy as well, and most other powers practice a mix of hard power and soft power in their foreign policy. So to summarize, hard power projection in foreign policy is nothing but the usage of one's military strength, the usage of one's economic strength to punish other countries, to threaten them, to force them to change their behavior. There is coercion involved in hard power diplomacy. Let me give you some examples. India's surgical strikes against Pakistan following the Uri attacks. India used its military strength to punish Pakistan, which forces Pakistan to change its behavior towards India. That is, with regard to Pakistan's sponsorship of terrorism against India. Another example of hard power exercise is the American sanctions against Iran, American sanctions against Russia. Even by using one's economic strength, a major power can punish the other country. It can cripple its economic system to force the other country to change its behavior. So when one country is leveraging its military strength or its economic strength to punish other countries, to target them, to threaten them, and when there is this element of coercion involved, where force is used to change the behavior of the other country, this is known as the exercise of hard power. China practices hard power diplomacy. China leverages its economic and military strength to force smaller countries into submission, right? So this is the display of hard power in foreign policy. Now contrast this with soft power. In soft power projection or in soft power diplomacy, Governments rely upon their cultural assets. They build close, trust-based government-to-government relationships, and they focus on people-to-people relationships. The focus is on bringing the people of two countries together. The focus is on constant engagement to provide aid, to provide assistance. That is to help the other country whenever they need assistance. And leveraging the cultural assets, civilizational heritage, or even engaging the diaspora in the other country, using them as cultural ambassadors to project your cultural symbols and civilizational heritage. All of this falls under soft power diplomacy. In soft power diplomacy, there is no coercion involved. There is no force, there is no threat. It is largely based on building goodwill and trust in the relationship, where one country treats the other as an equal partner, and there is positive engagement with countries sharing similar values, could be cultural values, political values, or economic values. And the focus is on building a trust-based partnership to promote people-to-people relations. So this represents soft power diplomacy. So let's understand more about this by talking about soft power diplomacy in the Indian context. Let's see how India engages in soft power diplomacy. Now, if you evaluate India's foreign policy from 1947 till now, you will see that our diplomacy is a fine mix of hard power and soft power diplomacy. As I told you, any major power would use a combination of the two. India does rely heavily on soft power to project its influence, and we have several initiatives to actually substantiate this argument. In our foreign policy, we leverage our cultural assets that stem from our rich cultural diversity and civilizational heritage. For example, look at how India projects yoga as a healthy lifestyle around the world. We got the International Yoga Day designated through the United Nations. The Indian missions abroad play a key role in promoting yoga by organizing these events periodically and regularly, as yoga is intrinsically linked with India's civilizational values. We promote various art forms from India, both classical and modern, be it dance forms like Bharatnatyam, Kathakali, Kuchipudi, etc. There is a huge appeal in foreign countries, in Western countries, in Central Asian countries, and India promotes these art forms. Even Indian music, both classical and again modern as well as Indian movies have gained a lot of popularity in the last few decades. Since 1960s, 70s, Indian movies, especially Hindi movies from Bollywood, and Bollywood songs have been a rage across several countries. If you have ever been to, let's say, a Central Asian country or Russia or even in East Europe or West Asia, you will constantly find several cultural symbols that are linked with Bollywood. Right? Never undermine the influence of movies and music as well. So from the days of Raj Kapoor to Rajnikant to Triple R, right? Indian movies have had a huge impact in several countries, and this naturally gives a cultural leverage for Indian foreign policy as well. And India leverages these influences. So we also engage the Indian community in the other countries. Even this is our soft power diplomacy. We closely work with the Indian community abroad, and we ensure that the Indian community acts as the cultural ambassador of India. The Indian citizens abroad, people of Indian origin abroad, they will act as cultural ambassadors of India, constantly projecting India's cultural influence. We also provide a lot of economic aid and assistance to other countries, especially to the smaller countries, to poor and developing nations. If they are hit by disasters, we provide disaster management assistance known as HADR, or Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief. Take for example, how when the pandemic broke out, India launched Mission Sagar to send essential drugs and supplies to all the major countries in the Indian Ocean, be it Sri Lanka, be it Mauritius or Maldives or even East African countries. They were all assisted by India when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. You take the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, for example. Even though India was badly hit by the 2004 tsunami, we sent out disaster management assistance to Thailand, Indonesia, Sri Lanka and Maldives. So that is an example of soft power diplomacy. We extend line of credits. These are concessional loans that India gives out as investments to several friendly countries. We even have a flagship program called ITEC, Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation, through which scholarships and training programs are funded by India in several developing and underdeveloped countries. Many countries in Asia, in the Pacific, in Africa, they all receive scholarships and training programs from India. Then we also have the Pan-African E-Network project, another ambitious Indian initiative, which was initially proposed by then President APJ Abdul Kalam, through which India is leveraging its satellite technology to provide telemedicine and tele-education across several African countries. We are providing remote health services and as well as remote education by linking African students and patients with elite Indian institutions, with Indian teachers and doctors. So ISRO provides the backbone for this, the backbone infrastructure, and the Pan-African E-Network project is a huge success for India, right? So these are just few examples that I'm quoting here to show how India engages in soft power diplomacy. Apart from all these engagements, we also tap our religious links. We rely upon our civilizational heritage. See, India is the birthplace of all the non-Abrahamic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, right? So different religions have thrived. Tolerance has been the benchmark of Indian civilization, and the country does display a lot of diversity even today. Later, non-Abrahamic religions came in, right? Islam, Christianity, then Judaism. All different faiths have been accepted in India. They have thrived in India together, and that is what represents the cultural mosaic of India today. And India builds upon this strength. India's strength comes from its cultural diversity, and we tap the religious links in our foreign policy as well. For example, when we engage with, let's say, Southeast Asian and East Asian countries. In these countries, Buddhism is still a widely popular religion. And India being the birthplace of Buddhism, at least the Indian subcontinent being the birthplace of Buddhism, we leverage the Buddhist heritage in our foreign policy to gain influence in all these Asian countries. There are many Asian countries where Buddhism is widely popular. Take Sri Lanka and Bhutan, for example. Both are Buddhist majority nations in South Asia. Myanmar, again, is a Buddhist majority nation. Even in China, Nepal, then across Southeast and East Asia, from Thailand to Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Singapore, Malaysia, even in Indonesia, right? And in Japan and South Korea, and of course in China. All across these Asian countries, Buddhism is a widely popular religion. Buddhism traveled far and wide from India towards the other Asian regions. So we tap those cultural links, the religious links, to further our foreign policy. Similarly, when we engage with Central Asian countries and West Asian countries, we tap our Islamic heritage. We tap those Islamic connections. When we engage with Nepal or Mauritius or Suriname, right, where you have a strong Hindu population even today, even Fiji, for example, we tap the Hindu linkages and the linguistic and cultural linkages we have with these countries. So by working these civilizational links and cultural links, India projects its soft power influence, which is crucial in today's world of diplomacy. Because almost every major power has done this. Just like hard power, soft power is equally important. A country just cannot rely on its military strength and economic strength, right? That will not build partnerships, that will not gain friends for you, right? You may be able to force others to behave in a certain way, but you will not get trust and goodwill. So since several decades, that too in the modern era, soft power diplomacy has been equally important as much as hard power diplomacy. Take, for example, how Hollywood played a key role in American diplomacy in promoting the American culture during the Cold War period, in promoting free market capitalism, promoting liberalist ideas, right, that gained popularity around the world and which eventually helped in defeating communism as well. This was part of a psychological warfare between US and Soviet Union. China also engages in this. China, in the last few decades, has been engaging in these operations, these influence operations in several countries to project and promote Chinese cultural influences. China promotes the Mandarin language across several countries. It is also tapping into its Buddhist heritage. China has a very significant Buddhist population. I'll show you the exact numbers later. So China leverages its Buddhist heritage and uses the religious links it has with Buddhism to promote its own version of Buddhism. Now this is where India and China run into a conflict according to the author. The author is mainly talking about how Buddhism has been used for geopolitical reasons by both India and China. India has this initiative called the Buddhist Circuit Initiative, under which we are developing better tourist infrastructure at all the key Buddhist pilgrimage sites in India and as well as in Nepal. India is developing better tourist infrastructure, better airports, better train and road connectivity, better hotels and better tourist facilities. And we're also promoting these sites in the target countries so that we can attract Buddhist pilgrims from all these Asian countries to India. This will boost tourism, boost revenue and foreign exchange for India. And more importantly, it will help India gain influence in those countries. It will help us generate goodwill in favor of India amongst the people and the host government as well. So under Buddhist Circuit Initiative, India has been developing better infrastructure across several important Buddhist pilgrimage sites. India is home to quite a few of them. For example, we have Shravasti, Kushinagar, Sarnath, Bodh Gaya, Rajgir. All these are major Buddhist pilgrimage sites spread out across UP, Bihar. We also have many more sites in Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, parts of Andhra and Telangana as well. So India is hoping to create better tourist infrastructure across these Buddhist sites, and we promote these pilgrimage sites in across Asian countries so we can attract tourists from those countries. Is that clear? It will not only boost our domestic economy and improve tourism and gain foreign exchange for India, but it will gain influence for India in other countries. We are also working with Nepal to develop important Buddhist sites such as Kapilavastu and Lumbini. All these historical sites I've mentioned, they are of great importance in Buddhism, right? I've added a list over here to highlight the importance of each Buddhist pilgrimage site, at least the prominent ones. Lumbini being the birthplace of Lord Gautam Buddha, right? Kushinagar being the place where he attained parinirvana, which is said to be in today's Nepal. Rajgir being the place where he delivered one of many of his sermons. Then Vaishali being the place where Lord Buddha is said to have delivered his last sermon before his eventual death and parinirvana. Bodh Gaya being the place where Lord Buddha is said to have attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, the sacred Bodhi tree. Shravasti along the Rapti river in UP being the place where Buddha spent a considerable amount of time, and you still have a lot of cultural and symbolic elements present here that ties the place with Buddhism. Sarnath being the place where Buddha delivered his first sermon after his enlightenment. Right? So all such important places and locations that are present in India and also in Nepal, they are the focus of our Buddhist Circuit Initiative. You look at Kapilavastu in southern Nepal. It was the capital of the Shakya dynasty, the Shakyas, to which Siddhartha or Lord Gautam Buddha belonged to. So all these key sites are being developed by India, and in many different ways we are engaging with all the Asian countries. For example, recently in Uttar Pradesh at Kushinagar, India built and inaugurated an international airport. And during the inauguration of this airport, officials from Sri Lanka were invited. From the former Rajapaksa government, the top leaders were invited, thus marking the close Buddhist linkages between India and Sri Lanka. We constantly promote our Buddhist heritage across Asian countries in this manner, from Japan to South Korea, from Singapore to Thailand, from Cambodia to Bhutan, across all these countries. For India, it's a priority to promote its Buddhist heritage. So in this context, India had recently organized the Global Buddhist Summit. Just last month in April, the Modi government organized a very important summit, the Global Buddhist Summit, that brought together several top Buddhist monks and scholars and thinkers from around the world to project India as the fountainhead of Buddhist heritage. This is India claiming ownership over Buddhist civilizational heritage. Now, this is where India faces stiff competition from China. All right. Now, before we look at what China is doing with Buddhism, let's see how India is leveraging Buddhism. See, in India, Buddhist symbolism is very evident even in our day-to-day life. Be it the very spirit of ahimsa, tolerance, right, which defines Indian society, India's freedom struggle. Even the national symbols, the Ashoka pillar was from Sarnath, right, from the Mauryan era, from the Ashokan Empire. The Dharma wheel in our national flag is also of Buddhist heritage. The Panchsheel agreement that we had signed with China was based on 5 Buddhist principles which apply to a Buddhist monk. It was supposed to breed friendly and positive relations between India and China. So there are many such symbolic depictions of Buddhism in India's polity, in India's foreign policy, and even in our society and in our day-to-day life. So it's only natural for India to leverage this Buddhist heritage, and we are leveraging this for 3 primary reasons. The first focus of our Buddhist diplomacy is to gain influence across Asian countries where Buddhism is still a widely popular religion. Especially in Buddhist majority countries, India has given utmost focus to promote its Buddhist heritage. It's been an integral part of our Look East and Act East policy. Under the Look East Act East policy, India has given top priority for its Buddhist diplomacy. This also helps India to counter the Chinese influence, as China also claims ownership over Buddhism. It helps India to counter China across Southeast Asia and East Asia, and also helps India to become more appealing to the Western countries and the Western audience. Because see, don't forget, India houses the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan refugees, whom China considers as anti-national elements. When China cracked down upon the Tibetan Buddhists, India accepted them as refugees, thus leading to a permanent divide between India and China over the Tibetan issue. Right? India has settled the Tibetan refugees at Dharamshala and Kushalnagar in Himachal Pradesh and Karnataka respectively. And we have also offered Dalai Lama a place, a seat in India. So India, being the host of the Dalai Lama, the figurehead of Buddhist monasteries and Buddhist politics, right, does gain a natural influence to engage in Buddhist diplomacy by leveraging its Buddhist heritage. That explains why the Global Buddhist Summit was organized. We are also reviving the Nalanda University under our Look East Act East policy, one of the ancient, most oldest universities and ancient centers of learning. Right? Centuries ago, students and scholars from around Asia, from across Asia would come to Nalanda to study, and it was specializing in Buddhist studies as well. So we are reviving the Nalanda University as part of our Look East Act East policy with funding from East Asia Summit countries. So there are many more examples I can give you to explain how India prioritizes Buddhist diplomacy. Now, you will see a stark contrast here from what China is doing. China is also trying to claim Buddhist heritage, and it's trying to leverage its Buddhist influence to counter India. The writer, who belongs to the Shakya clan, first he explains the background of the Shakyas, and then he goes on to make a very, very interesting point. See, the Shakyas are considered to be the descendants of Lord Buddha himself. Right? Siddhartha belonged to the Shakya clan, the Shakya rulers. And after being born in Lumbini, eventually Siddhartha, as you know, renounced the worldly pleasures. He went on to become a monk, a traveler, and laid the foundations of Buddhism. But the Shakyas, who are seen as the descendants of Siddhartha, they ruled Kapilavastu after Buddha's parinirvana, after he attained moksha. But they didn't have any army. They didn't believe in any usage of offensive or armed forces. They believed in pacifism and ahimsa, which was the core tenets of Buddhism. But eventually the Shakyas were massacred in today's Nepal. Following which the Shakyas had fled to different parts of this region, spreading all the way from today's Afghanistan to Myanmar. They had spread away to Gandhara, which is modern day Afghanistan, and across Myanmar during the Magda rule. In the Kathmandu Valley, later the Shakyas were accommodated. The Shakyas were brought back to the region, and in the Kathmandu region, they were accommodated and given the status of priests. They were equated with the Hindu priests, the Vajracharya priests. But however, they were not permitted to practice priesthood. meaning they weren't given the right to practice the priesthood status in the Buddhist monasteries and temples. But however, if you look at one important site in Nepal called the Golden Temple or the Hiranyavarna Mahavira, the Golden Temple in Nepal, which is a sacred Buddhist site, here the Shakyas act as temple caretakers and they conduct all the rituals. Alright? Now why am I highlighting this? Why is this important? First of all, the basic background of Shakyas can be important for your prelims. Now looking at the kind of questions UPSC has been asking in prelims, such facts can become very important. And the Golden Temple that we are talking about is very relevant for Indian diplomacy because recently India has provided a grant to Nepal to develop parts of the Golden Temple complex. This is where the Shakyas, the descendants of Lord Gautam Buddha, they conserve and protect the temple. They are caretakers of the temple and they practice the rituals as well. So here India is very, very interested after Lumbini, which is the birth site of Lord Buddha, and we are in direct competition with China here. Many local Nepalese and the local Shakyas, they don't like this geopolitical competition. See, initially when India was looking to develop Lumbini, which is the birth site of Lord Buddha, China stepped in and a Chinese company had taken over the development of the Lumbini site. Later, India also has managed to make investments in Lumbini. After Lumbini, another sacred site in Nepal is the Golden Temple complex. Over here, Chinese tourists visit in very large numbers. And India is probably looking to counter this according to the writer and has offered a grant to Nepal to develop the Golden Temple complex. It is this geopolitical competition between India and China that the writer is against. He's saying that religion and culture should not be exploited by the two powers for their national interests. But however, if you look at the other side of the argument, it is India's cultural symbol and cultural heritage. India will have every right to project its Buddhist heritage as a part of its soft power diplomacy. That too, when China is doing it, it would be only right on India's part to counter this as well to protect India's national interests. See, recently when Prime Minister Modi visited Nepal last year, he laid the foundation for India International Center for Buddhist Culture and Heritage, which India is going to build at Lumbini. This is to counter the Chinese investments at Nepal. At Lumbini, China has not only developed the Lumbini site, where you have a sacred pilgrimage site marking the birthplace of Lord Buddha, but China has also built the international airport near Lumbini. The Greater Buddha International Airport is a Chinese project funded by the Asian Development Bank, but it was constructed by a Chinese company. So India is looking to counter the Chinese presence and influence at Lumbini by investing in such projects. All right? Now, if you ask why China is so interested in Buddhism, what has China got to do with this? It's because China is also home to a very large Buddhist population. There are at least 245 million Buddhists with thousands of monasteries and temples spread all across China. Many of these Chinese monasteries in faraway Beijing and Shanghai, they are connected with monasteries in Nepal, India, and of course in Tibet. So there is a historical age-old connection here. And of course, for China, it is imperative to use Buddhist identity to build its national integrity, to ensure that religious divide doesn't become an internal divide of China. So China leverages its Buddhist ideology in its soft power diplomacy, and this is a core part of the agenda of Xi Jinping. Chinese Premier Xi Jinping has aggressively promoted China's foreign policy and its interests, and clearly religious overtones have been added into its cultural and linguistic diplomacy. For many decades, China has been promoting its culture, its communist way of life, the Mandarin language, and now it has added a religious overtone to this by promoting Buddhism as well. Not just in Nepal, China is very proactive in Sri Lanka, in Cambodia, Laos, and across Southeast Asia in promoting its Buddhist heritage. So this is China's version of Buddhist diplomacy. So you can see this direct competition going on between India and China as far as their soft power diplomacy is concerned, and that is what the writer is concerned about. He talks about this and he says that religious symbols and cultural heritage should not be exploited for geopolitical reasons. That is the writer's viewpoint. But if you look at it from India's perspective, India is in the right place. India has every right to claim ownership over Buddhist heritage and promote this as part of our foreign policy. It's crucial to protect our national interests and also to counter the Chinese influence. Now let's move to the next article from page number 10 that talks about a recent shift that the US has shown in its policy towards China. It's a very important assessment that the writer is making here. So let's understand this in more detail. See, it was in 1979 that US and China formally established diplomatic relations. Because when modern China, today's China, was established, that is PRC, the People's Republic of China, when it came to power in 1948 after the Chinese Civil War, initially the US did not recognize the PRC because the PRC had been formed following the Maoist rebellion, the Maoist Civil War in China, and the Maoists, or the Communist Party of China, the Chinese Communist Party, had overthrown the then Chinese government, the Republic of China government, and had cornered the Republic of China into Taiwan, into the small island of Taiwan. So for many years, there were two Chinese governments. The older Chinese government, the Republic of China, which was now cornered in Taiwan, and the PRC, led by the Communist Party, which had won the Civil War under the leadership of Mao Zedong, which ruled over mainland China. Following this, the PRC became an aggressive power, an expansionist power. It went on to occupy Tibet, committed a lot of atrocities in Tibet and in other parts of China, including in Xinjiang. As China started committing these atrocities, US boycotted China, and this was also part of their Cold War rivalry. As China being a communist state, it was clearly aligned with the Soviet power bloc. So US was targeting China and kept its distance from PRC and did not establish ties with PRC until 1970s. It was only in 1970s that US started opening up to China under President Richard Nixon and his national security advisor Henry Kissinger. They were the ones who prioritized the reopening of US ties with China. In fact, for US it became such a top priority that US relied on Pakistan in early 1970s to provide an opening towards China, to mediate a relationship with China. It was a top priority for the US. This is what led US to rely heavily on Pakistan, and US eventually ignored the atrocities Pakistan was committing in East Pakistan against Bengalis. It pushed US to get hostile against India as well during the 1971 war, when India was protecting the Bengali refugees and fighting against Pakistan to liberate Bangladesh. India was even threatened by President Nixon and his national security advisor Henry Kissinger as a result of their proximity to Pakistan. So since then, US gave a lot of attention and focus to building ties with China, and by 1970s, 1980s, you saw the emergence of a close economic relationship and a weird strategic partnership between US and China. In a way, China had by then carried out its economic reforms. It had opened up its economy to liberalization and globalization, right? It was quite weird because a communist country was embracing capitalism. Today, China is almost a capitalist country in its economic model while being a communist state in its political setup. So the US openly backed China to emerge as a major economic powerhouse in order to pull the country away from Soviet influence. This was the Cold War dynamics between US, China, and Soviet Union. But because of this opening of relations between US and China, US started relying heavily on China for economic reasons. By 1980s, 1990s, China was already emerging as a manufacturing powerhouse. It was becoming a technological superpower. And day by day, China was gaining more prominence and influence as compared to the US itself. It reached a point where the US itself would become heavily dependent on the Chinese economy. Most American companies shifted their manufacturing base to China, right? They played a direct role in enabling China to emerge as a manufacturing powerhouse. China would go on to hold the largest reserves of US dollars, thereby having a huge control on the US economy itself. The US economy became heavily dependent on Chinese imports. So by early 2000, we saw the rise of a competition between the two new global powers, that is China on one hand and US on the other hand, trying to retain its influence. So since then, US has always feared its economic dependence on China. especially in manufacturing for several essential commodities and technologies, US became dependent on China, and this has always been a disadvantage for the US. So these issues, these trade and technology related issues, they have gained more prominence in the last few years as a new Cold War has begun between these two global powers. You clearly witness not just a geostrategic rivalry in the military domain and in the intelligence domain, even in the trade and technology domain. A geopolitical rivalry is very clearly evident between the global powers. Is that clear? And this has pushed US to get more hostile to China, and China also gets more hostile towards the US. Recently, when Donald Trump was the president, Donald Trump followed a policy of decoupling in order to break the American dependency away from China. When Donald Trump was heading the US from 2016 to 2020, his policy was to decouple US from China because the US and Chinese economy had become coupled, meaning they had become dependent on each other. They had become tied to each other despite their geopolitical differences. So Donald Trump was very aggressive in his foreign policy, and he not only targeted China diplomatically, but even in the economic domain, in the trade and technology domain, he stepped up the pressure of the US against China. His focus was on decoupling the American economy from the Chinese economy so that the American dependency on China could reduce. So Donald Trump engaged in a trade war by increasing tariffs on Chinese imports. To create a barrier, a trade barrier against Chinese imports, Donald Trump levied heavy tariffs, thus launching a trade war against China, and China also retaliated with a trade war. This further extended to other key domains such as 5G networks, where US started alleging that Chinese companies like Huawei, they are involved in espionage operations for Chinese intelligence. By raising these security threats, Chinese companies like Huawei were kept out of the 5G sector, the 5G rollout in the US. So this has very quickly escalated into a major geopolitical rivalry, that too in the trade and technology domain. So this was the Trump policy of decoupling, that is separating the American economy and its dependency from China. But now in the last few months, you are witnessing a shift in the American policy. From the policy of decoupling, we are witnessing a shift towards something known as de-risking. This is a policy being championed by current President Joe Biden. Joe Biden realizes that US will not benefit from a decoupling. In fact, US interests could get hurt. So he believes that de-risking is a better way to work with China, to reduce the risk to the American economy and to American geopolitics from its dependency on China. Instead of breaking away from China entirely, instead of decoupling entirely, the current American policy, the shift that you are witnessing, is towards de-risking, to reduce the risk to American economy from the Chinese economy. This concept was promoted at the latest G7 summit that was held at Hiroshima in Japan, and it has been widely accepted by the G7 members. Is that clear? See here, Joe Biden is pushing towards reducing the risks from China without antagonizing China or without getting hostile to China. Because of course, US realizes that further tensions and rivalry could be disastrous for both the sides. Moreover, US may not get the support of the European allies as they are already affected by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In the case of Russia-Ukraine conflict, European countries are trying to get the support of China to target Russia, to ensure China follows the sanctions in order to ensure that Russia is pushed back. So if US is trying to target China and decouple with China, US might lose the support of its European allies as well. And also in today's globalized world, decoupling is not a practical viable policy, right? In an interconnected global economy, any trade war or any decoupling will hurt every other country. It could come back to hurt the US itself. So the American policy right now is de-risking instead of decoupling, that was followed by Donald Trump. Under de-risking, the policy is focused on shifting investments away from China, encouraging Western companies to move away from Chinese investments, making investments in China, to diversify their investments into other countries to build resilient supply chains so that global supply chains are not just dependent on China. This was a hard lesson learned by US and every other country, including India, during the pandemic. When the pandemic broke out, the shutdown in China affected the global supply chains and disrupted economies around the world. It clearly showed how China could easily misuse this advantage for geopolitical reasons. The Russia-Ukraine war has further destabilized the supply chains. So now the US focus is on de-risking from China, that is to eliminate the risks that come from the Chinese economy and from the Chinese diplomacy. So the focus is on shifting Western investments away from China to diversify it and to build resilient supply chains so that Western countries are not heavily dependent on China alone. So this is a more moderate approach that the US is following as compared to the more aggressive, hostile approach of Donald Trump. You see this major shift happening from decoupling to de-risking, and this will of course have implications for India because it will define how US will help India in countering China. An aggressive US against China was good news for India, as India could expect diplomatic and military support against Chinese aggression. But now that US is toning down its targeting of China, it's only looking to de-risk its economy without instigating a bigger rivalry or a conflict. This could mean that US may reduce its focus on the Indo-Pacific. It might reduce the direct support that it may give to India in case of hostilities with China. So that is where the implications lie for Indian foreign policy as well. So you need to understand this policy shift from decoupling to de-risking. That is the core point here. That is the important point the article is making. Now moving on, we have a very important infographic on page number 9, relevant for international relations and as well as for environment and ecology. The Hindu brings out a few charts that helps us understand the investments that are being made in the clean and renewable energy sector. Please pay attention to this. It's actually very interesting, very relevant for your prelims as well. All the data depicted here in these charts, it is based on an important report which is brought out by the International Energy Agency, the IEA. The International Energy Agency, which tracks energy investments across the world, brings out a very important report called the World Energy Investment Report. Is that clear? So please make a note of this fact, very important for your prelims. So according to data brought out in this World Energy Investment Report, investments in clean energy has increased in the last few years. There is a clear trend which is visible that investments around the world in clean sector, clean energy sector, where we are moving away from fossil fuels, and in renewable energy sector has gone up, and it is mainly driven by investments in electric vehicles and renewable power, that is solar and wind power. These investments are driving up the investments towards the clean and renewable energy sector. The investments in the EV sector, in the EV market, around the world there is a shift happening towards electric vehicles in the automobile sector, and also in the energy sector there is a shift towards solar, wind and other renewable forms of energy and a lower dependence on fossil fuel based energy. This shift which is happening, right, to reduce emissions, to meet the climate action targets, has increased investments in the clean energy, renewable energy sector. You can clearly see that in the graph over here. Please look at the chart here. From 2015 till now, fossil fuel investments have almost stagnated. It has even declined comparatively. You can see year on year how fossil fuel investments have stagnated and even declined gradually over a period of time. Now compare this with clean energy investments. Clean energy investments have increased quite consistently, that too by a significant margin in the last few years. This is a huge shift in the global trend. Now where are these investments happening? In which countries? It's largely happening in China and advanced developed countries like European Union, United States and Japan. This is what the report highlights. The biggest investments in clean energy and renewable energy is happening in China and in developed economies. This is a very, very important observation. In Japan, US and European markets, and of course China at the top, this is where the biggest investments are happening in the clean energy sector. But India is not far behind. India has prioritized investments in clean renewable energy sector. We are focusing on electric vehicles as well and also on solar and wind power. India has launched the International Solar Alliance. We have a dedicated mission to switch towards electric vehicles. So this is also driving India's investments in the clean energy sector, and amongst the developing countries, India is right at the top. Even Brazil performs quite well, followed by a few other countries and regions. So remembering this is very important, this trend in investments in clean energy. All right, the largest investments are happening in China, followed by the developed economies. India is not far behind. Amongst the developing countries, India is one of the top investors in clean and renewable energy. Now look at this breakup of the investments. The investments in clean energy has largely gone towards electric vehicles and renewable power. Amongst all forms of clean energy, this is where the biggest investments have happened, in electric vehicles and renewable power. But one point of concern is that the cost of clean energy, the per unit cost of renewable energy has slightly increased over the years. Now this is a concern because see, at least let's say 15-20 years ago, when clean energy was being promoted like solar, electric energy, etc., right, battery based energy, etc., the concern was the cost, because enough raw materials weren't available, the processes weren't there, the inputs were very expensive, right? It wasn't being produced on a large scale. So generally, clean renewable energy was seen as very, very expensive. Any such hybrid forms of energy and renewable forms of energy were considered to be very expensive because mainly the input cost was very high and adoption was very low. Let's say if you look at data from before 2010, per unit cost of solar energy was many times more than the cost of energy from coal or other fossil fuel based sources. So this would make clean renewable energy projects unviable. But in the last 15 to 20 years, there is greater acceptance of clean renewable energy. There have been more investments made. There is greater adoption today. And as a result, the per unit cost went down. Be it the cost of solar energy, wind energy, EV batteries and storage batteries, the cost of all these forms of clean renewable energy saw a decline by 2019-2020. This was good news because it would mean we could further promote the adoption of these technologies. It would be economically viable. But because of the disruption caused by the pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war, the cost of inputs has again increased slightly, and this has led to an increase in the per unit cost of renewable energy. You can see the slight increase happening here after 2019. Just observe the graph closely over here. After the pandemic, and especially because of Russia-Ukraine war, the disruption that has happened in supply chains has increased the input cost. The raw material cost has gone up, like steel, cement, and essential commodities. Prices have shot up. So this has increased the cost of renewable energy projects as well, thus increasing the per unit cost. And this could affect the adoption of clean energy, at least in the short term. So that is one concerning development that the report is pointing to, and every other development here represents a positive development towards investments in clean energy. So understanding these trends, these patterns, and this analysis is very, very important, especially for your prelims. UPSC has this habit of asking such questions, right? Even in mains, let's say you have a question or an essay topic related to this, it's always good to present such data based on credible reports. If possible, draw the chart roughly as well to show that you have an in-depth knowledge of these topics, right? So with this, we complete the discussion on the big topics oriented towards mains, and we come to the last part of the discussion where we will talk about few prelims articles. Let's look at this article from page number 6 related to science and technology. Indian scientists, along with a global team of experts, they have discovered a new exoplanet. A new exoplanet the size of Jupiter, with a mass 13 times the size of Jupiter, has been discovered, and that is a very big development. This discovery has been made by Physical Research Laboratory headquartered at Ahmedabad, which is one of the organizations related to ISRO. ISRO being the parent, right? The PRL, Physical Research Laboratory, plays a key role in astronomy, in particle physics, and works closely with ISRO and other scientific institutions. So at the Physical Research Laboratory in Ahmedabad, we have the Exoplanet Research Group. From India, it is PRL which is leading our research towards exoplanets. Now, what are exoplanets? Exoplanets are essentially those planets which are beyond our solar system. They are present beyond our solar system. Such planetary bodies are referred to as exoplanets. Some of them orbit around stars, just like the solar system, the planets in the solar system orbit the sun. Most of the exoplanets also orbit around their respective stars, but there are some free-floating exoplanets as well, called as rogue planets. They're not held by the gravitational power of any star, but they are free-floating exoplanets as well. But essentially, any planetary body present outside of the solar system is an exoplanet. Now, a team of Indian scientists along with a global team of experts from Australia, France, US, Germany, right? It's a collaborative project. Through this, they have discovered this new Jupiter-sized exoplanet, which is the highest density planet that is known to humans till date. Its density is around 14 grams per cubic meter. And its mass has been estimated quite accurately to be 13 times that of Jupiter. Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system, right? This exoplanet is not just the same size, almost the same size, but because of its heavy density, its mass is nearly 13 times that of Jupiter. So the discovery of such a massive giant exoplanet is quite significant, and the discovery was made by using the PARAS instrument. PARAS stands for PRL Advanced Radial Velocity Abu Sky Search Spectrograph. It's a scientific instrument that ISRO and PRL have deployed at the Guru Shikhar Observatory in Mount Abu in Rajasthan to carry out these scientific and astronomical observations. It is through the Abu Sky Observatory, the PARAS instrument of PRL, the Physical Research Laboratory, has detected this giant exoplanet along with accurately estimating its mass. Is that clear? This planet has been discovered around a star named as TOI 4603 or HD 245134. This star was previously discovered by NASA. NASA's the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. This program had detected this star, and at that time it was noted that around the star there is a large planet which is orbiting it probably. But enough data wasn't available about this possible planetary body present around this newly discovered star. So through an Indian research initiative, now this planet has been discovered, its mass has been estimated, and the most shocking fact is that it's a giant exoplanet, a massive giant exoplanet, and it's in the transition mass range. Its mass is between that of a giant planet and low mass brown dwarf, where the range falls between 11 to 16 times that of Jupiter. All right, there are only 5 such exoplanets known to humans in this weight category. In this mass category, right, in the range of 11 to 16 times of Jupiter, we know only 5 exoplanets, and Jupiter, the new one which has been discovered, which is the size of Jupiter, is the new entrant into this list. All right. So most likely a prelims question will focus on the Guru Shikhar Observatory, the PARAS instrument of the Physical Research Laboratory, right? And also maybe on the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite project of NASA. Is that clear? And just know the name of the star and where exactly this new exoplanet has been discovered. Just those basic facts should be more than sufficient. Now we come to the next article from page 13 related to international relations. According to this article, the King of Cambodia is on an important visit to India. It's the first ever visit by the King of Cambodia on a bilateral visit. This is designed to take forward the India-Cambodia relations, which is in fact quite special considering the historical civilizational links we have with Cambodia. See, under the Look East, Act East policy of India, the Look East policy was launched back in 1991 by the then Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. This has been given a further push by Prime Minister Modi under Act East policy, which was launched in 2014 as an upgraded version of the Look East policy. So under Look East Act East policy, we have prioritized our ties with Southeast Asian and East Asian countries. So Cambodia, being a Southeast Asian country, has got a lot of attention from India, and also the country has a lot of historical civilizational links with India. These links are represented through Hinduism and as well as through Buddhism. Is that clear? I'm sure all of you would have heard about the popular Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia, which is dedicated to Lord Vishnu, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site where many of popular movies, Hollywood movies also have been filmed. Right? This UNESCO World Heritage Site happens to be one of the world's largest temple complexes, Hindu temple complexes, and India has played a role in restoring and conserving the Angkor Wat temple. India's Archaeological Survey, the ASI, was given the task to conserve and protect the Angkor Wat temple site as part of our close bilateral relations. We are leveraging our Buddhist heritage as well. In fact, Cambodia is one of the focus countries of our Buddhist Circuit initiative, which we discussed earlier. India has also renovated and restored the sacred Taprom temple in Siem Reap, which is a landmark site in Cambodia. It's a very important Buddhist site which India has restored. These are two important cultural sites, one Hindu temple, one Buddhist temple, which have been restored by India. So both the countries have always relied upon their historical civilizational links, and today, through the India-ASEAN arrangement, through our close relations with ASEAN group, and also by closely working with Mekong-Ganga Cooperation, which is a regional group involving India and some of these Mekong Delta countries, we have paid a lot of attention to Cambodia. Under the Look East Act East policy, while working with the ASEAN countries, we have given investments to Cambodia. India has provided line of credit or LOC, which is basically a concessional loan for developmental projects in Cambodia. Through the ITEC program which we discussed, we have extended scholarship and training program to Cambodia. Under Mekong Ganga Cooperation or MGC, that brings India together with the CLMVT countries or the Mekong Delta countries, we have paid special focus to Cambodia. Alright, this region is called Mekong region or the Indo-China region, where you have the CLMVT countries. C stands for Cambodia, L for Laos, M for Myanmar, V for Vietnam, and T for Thailand. These are the Mekong Delta or Indo-China countries. We work closely with them under the MGC group, and we have given special attention to Cambodia in our relations. We have not only rebuilt these historical sites that mark our Hindu and Buddhist link with Cambodia, but we also have provided investments to help in development of Cambodia. Today we are focusing on building strong defense relations as well. The President of India, who welcomed the King of Cambodia, has stressed this point. The Indian President has stressed the need to build stronger defense relations with Cambodia. Because under the Act East policy, India is not only promoting close economic and cultural relations with these Southeast Asian and East Asian countries, but we are also prioritizing defense and strategic relations as well. So that is why this visit of the Cambodian king becomes very important. You should know these basic facts, and if there are any major developments, of course we will discuss this topic again in the upcoming Hindu analysis. Next, on page 14, we have another important article related to history. I'll take you through some important facts, important points related to this topic. Please make a note of this. Trust me, it's a very, very important topic for your prelims. You can even expect a 10-mark question maybe in your mains as well. The topic is related to Purana Qila or the old fort, which is a landmark in Delhi. Fresh round of excavations have been done around the Purana Qila site in Delhi, and a lot of new evidences and discoveries have come up that trace the history of Purana Qila and the site around it. Essentially, multiple empires and civilizations have layered their history over here. Right from the days of the Mauryas to Guptas to the Mughals, right? There is a layered history at this important site, which is Purana Qila. So the place doesn't belong to one empire or one religion or one community. It is something that truly depicts the diversity of India, right? The various empires, the kingdoms that have ruled the Indian subcontinent. New evidence has come up, archaeological evidence, pointing out its history to the pre-Mauryan era. There are shards of painted grey ware pottery which have been discovered, which has been dated to 1200 to 600 BC. The Purana Qila in modern times was built by the Mughal rulers, by the Mughal Emperor Humayun, and as well as by Sher Shah Suri. This is widely believed to be the site of Indraprastha, which is mentioned in Mahabharata, the Hindu epic mythological book. But this is where the site of Purana Qila came up, which is not just associated with the Mughals or the Sultanates or just one empire or kingdom. It has a huge history behind it, dating back to the Guptas, the Mauryas, and the pre-Mauryan era. New excavations have found remains of 900-year-old Vaikunta Vishnu from the Rajput period. So there is a link with the Rajput period as well. A terracotta plaque of goddess Gajalakshmi from Gupta period has been found. Structural remains of a 2,500-year-old terracotta ring well from the Mauryan period has been discovered, and a well-defined 4-room complex from the Sunga Kushan period, going all the way back to the Kushan dynasty, right? Even that has been found, along with various other artifacts, including beads, then coins, then seals and bone needles, etc. There is a millennial history here, at least a 2 millennium history at this region, at this site. Around 136 coins and 35 seals have been discovered, which establishes the region around Purana Qila as a trading center as well in historical times. So it is this layered history that you find here is what is significant for us. It's a site belonging not just to one period of Indian history or one empire or one kingdom. There is a layered cultural history here dating to different periods from pre-Mauryan to Mauryan to Sunga, Kushan, Gupta, post-Gupta, Rajputs, Sultanate and the Mughal dynasty. Right? So that is the beauty of this historical site, and you should know these basic facts for your prelims and your mains. Next, we have a small topic on page 15 related to space technology. China has sent its first batch of civilian astronauts into its space station, that is the Tiangong space station. Please write down the name of this space station, the Tiangong, or it is also referred to as the crown jewel of China's space program. This is China's ambitious space station, which the Chinese Space Agency has built. Just like you have the International Space Station, which is a global initiative of several countries led by US, led by the NASA. Similarly, China has its own space station called the Tiangong. And the recent development is quite important because China's space program is largely military led. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army, right, and the armed forces of China lead China's space program. It's a military led space program. For the first time, civilian astronauts have been launched into orbit and they will be docking with the Tiangong space station. Is that clear? China has also announced an ambitious plan to send astronauts to the moon by the end of the decade. By 2030, in 7 years, China plans to place humans on the moon again. This brings China in direct competition with the US again, in a reminder of the space race between US and Soviet Union during the Cold War period. Right? China has today become a major space power. It has reached the moon and the Mars, deployed robotic rovers and payloads. Now it is planning manned mission to the moon, and it has even placed 3 civilian astronauts in its space station, the Tiangong space station. Right? So please make a note of these key facts. Now we come to the last article for today. From page 15, we have an article referring to the clashes which have happened in Kosovo, where fresh clashes have been reported between the Serb community and the Albanians from Kosovo. There have been fresh clashes in North Kosovo, and NATO troops which are deployed here, they have been seriously injured in these clashes. Alright, NATO troops from Italy and Hungary, they have been hurt seriously, and a lot of injuries have taken place in these violent clashes that have occurred in northern Kosovo. So let's understand where exactly Kosovo is located. I'm sure many of you would not be familiar with this. Since UPSC is asking a lot of map-based questions, that too from conflict zones and international relations, the topic becomes very important. You should just know the basics. See, Kosovo and Serbia and the other countries here, they are present in the Balkan region, around the Balkan mountains in Southeast Europe. Is that clear? This is where the region is present. In Southeast of Europe, you have the Balkan region around the Balkan mountains, and these countries are called the Balkan countries. It includes Serbia, the home of the Serb ethnic group. Then you have Montenegro. This is Kosovo here. This is Albania. All right, North Macedonia, Greece, and Bulgaria over here. I think now you know where the region is present. You have the Adriatic Sea over here. All right, please note all these locations. In this Balkan region, there is an age-old conflict going on between the Serbs and the Albanians. This is an ethnic conflict. In the 1990s, this ethnic conflict had turned into a brutal war where thousands were killed and slaughtered all across the region. Eventually, the UN intervened, the NATO also had intervened, right? There were international troops, coalition troops deployed over here to stabilize the region. And in 2008, the Albanian region of Kosovo, which was actually part of Serbia, broke away from Serbia and declared independence. I'll repeat this point. Today, Kosovo is an independent country, all right? But here in Kosovo, it's the Albanians who are in majority, the Albanian ethnic community. This region here was actually part of Serbia before 2008. But following all the conflict and the ethnic divide, the Albanians from Kosovo, they broke apart from the Serbs because of their ethnic rivalry and declared their independence in 2008. More than 100 countries have recognized Kosovo as an independent country, but Serbia still does not recognize Kosovo. Because Kosovo is a breakaway region. Serbs, they don't recognize this Albanian region of Kosovo as it was born out of this ethnic conflict. So in Kosovo here, in the northern parts, you have the Serb community present. You can see here. This is where there are constant tensions between the Serbs and the Albanians. They resist the rule of the Albanians in Kosovo and fresh clashes have happened. And to maintain peace here, NATO troops were deployed and they have been injured and hurt in these clashes between the ethnic groups. Alright, so just understanding these basic points is more than sufficient for your prelims. You need not get into the details of the topic, but just the basics here, where the region is located, the conflict is between which communities, the Serbs and the Albanians. What really happened with Kosovo? Kosovo broke apart from Serbia in 2008, declared independence, and in this Albanian region, you have Serbs present in northern Kosovo. And the Serbs here, they rebel, they protest, it often leads to clashes, and now NATO troops have been injured and tensions have increased. So US and Russia, which are major influences here, they have also intervened, they have stepped in. It also marks a global rivalry between them, an external rivalry between US and Russia, which are seeking to gain influence in the Balkan region. Alright, so on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope it was an elaborative, comprehensive and useful discussion. Please take up these questions for your answer writing practice. It's based on what we have already covered. I expect all of you to write an answer because now the time is for your answer writing. The time is to improve your answer writing skills as mains is going to approach very soon. So please write an answer to the questions, post them in the answer writing portal which has been given in the description box below. So as I end the session, don't forget to head to our Telegram channel. We have questions on these topics. Take up those questions for your practice. And if you like the session, just support us through your comments. I'll go through the comments as well. That would be always very encouraging. Press the like button and share it with other aspirants. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.